Thank you very much for being here. My name is Alicia McDonald. I'm the Director of Privacy at the Stanford Center for Internet and Society. And I have the privilege of introducing Chris Wolf tonight. He's flown in from New York to be here today. He's normally based in DC. And he is a partner and the director of the Privacy Information Management Practice Group at the DC law firm Hogan & Lovells. He's been doing privacy and electronic issues and issues around speech online for a very long time. He's been doing litigation on the Electronic Communications Privacy Act since the 90s. He's done quite a bit with private practice, and he's been a scholar in the legal side for a very long time. Chris's work has also been extremely important in the global context beyond just the US, and he's really assembled quite a Rolodex over the years. One of the places where Chris and I have intersected is that he's also the founder of the Future of Privacy Forum, which is a fantastic group doing really good work, one of the sane voices in this whole space. And he's been extremely good there. Also relevant, Chris is on the board of the Anti-Defamation League, which gives the whole work on hate speech an added dimension and salience that's just fantastic. So we're here tonight because he has co-authored a book called Viral Hate, along with Abraham Foxman, who is the national director of the ADL. And if you've not had a chance yet, the book will be available at the bookstore after this event, so feel free to stop by on campus if you haven't picked it up yet, or Amazon, of course, has it too. I just want to give one more note before we start, which is that we are filming this tonight. So Chris will speak for about half an hour, 40 minutes. We'll open this up to questions. Please line up behind the mics and we'll do the questions. But just be aware that this is being recorded. It will go on the web. So I don't want anybody surprised by that, right? If you have questions that you're not comfortable doing, feel free to come up after, and we can do questions one-on-one as well, briefly. But we do need to let Chris leave since he's on East Coast time. So thank you all very, very much for being here, and I look forward to hearing from Chris.
Great, thanks. Alicia, thank you for that nice introduction. I always love being here at Stanford. But I want to start by announcing that the hashtag for tonight's talk is Old Guy Talks About Technology. No, seriously, you're looking at the classic example of someone for whom the digital revolution occurred long after I grew up. I'm the classic digital immigrant, and many of you in the room, not all of you, but many of you are digital natives who grew up with this technology and have known the marvels of the internet most or all of your lives. So you need to understand, I graduated from college 37 years ago. So 37 years before I graduated from college, Gone with the Wind was released, and Germany invaded Poland. When I graduated in '76, the Vietnam War had just ended, and Carter beat Ford for the presidency. So in terms of technology, the hot technology when I graduated from college included TV remote controls, power door locks, pocket calculators that cost about $260 with basic functionality, and a really cool new electronic game called Pong, which had this image that went back and forth across the TV screen. And when I was in college, I communicated with my family through letters, yes, letters, and postcards, and the once-a-week telephone call, where my father invariably said, "This is long distance, it's costing money, I hope you're well, goodbye." And so today, when college students communicate, they post, tweet, like, poke, text, and occasionally talk on their mobile devices, and they do it anytime and all the time. And frankly, I could have well turned out like my dad when it came to technology. I remember he used to invite me over to his house to fix his VCR. You remember VCRs? And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, come here." And then I would go up and I would see electrical tape over where the clock would be, and I'd peel it back and the clock was flashing 12, 12, 12. So that was his solution. So how is it that I can stand up here and talk about technology given my age and my genetics, and the fact that I was a government major in college? And the simple answer is luck. In the early 1990s, I'd been practicing law for a while, doing a variety of commercial litigations, and I was lucky enough to get a communications company as a client. The company was MCI, which some of you may not even remember, now part of Verizon. and it hired me to handle a case in San Jose involving a failed joint development project. It was a 3-month-long jury trial in Silicon Valley. And by the way, we won the case because I don't talk about cases that I've lost. The case was all about technology that allowed what seemed miraculous to me. It allowed text, voice, and video to flow across telephone lines through a multiplexer, which was essentially a precursor to the commercial internet. And many of the witnesses in the trial talked about the internet a lot in their testimony. And it occurred to me that this internet thing may turn out to be something. Unfortunately, I didn't invest in any internet companies then, but I did decide I wanted to invest in my legal career, and I focused my law practice as much as possible on internet-related things. So in the 1990s, I handled a variety of matters ranging from domain name disputes to, this was an interesting one, representing the Washington Post when the Church of Scientology sued it because its reporters had the audacity to use the internet to look at content of the Church of Scientology online, copyright case. And in 1998, I had a pro bono case representing a gay sailor that the Navy had spied on in violation of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, and that case led to my current focus on privacy law that Alicia mentioned. And at about the same time, I became involved with the Anti-Defamation League, which is celebrating its 100th year this year, and whose mission is to fight anti-Semitism and promote justice and fair treatment for all. So I became a volunteer lay leader and tried to pair my interest in things internet with the mission of the League. And obviously the work of the League predated my involvement. It really has dealt with the way people communicate hate and act on hate for most of its 100 years. And actually dealt with online issues as early as 1986, writing a report called Bulletin Boards of Hate. And we have two professionals here who work every day on this matter, Steve Freeman and Jonathan Vick, and I just want to thank them for all the work that they have done and will continue to do, I hope. And so as the ADL online hate agenda is set from the top, that person at the top is its national director, Abe Foxman. And so when Abe asked me to co-author Viral Hate, I really jumped at the opportunity. Abe, as some of you may know, is a Holocaust survivor, and he's put it this way, that acts of hate start with words of hate, and has said that the Holocaust didn't begin with ovens, it began with words of intolerance and hate. And I share Abe's despair for the pollution of the amazing medium that the internet is for communication and entertainment and information, because that pollution not only degrades the experience for all of us, it discourages many people from participating at all, and it actually results, as we'll talk about in a moment, in real-world harm. So early on in the history of the internet, most of the work that the ADL was focused on dealt with static websites and then eventually interactive websites. And we discovered that hate groups had discovered the internet as a tool to spread their vitriol, to organize and to recruit and to mislead and to scheme. These are people who used to meet down dark alleys and used to distribute their materials in plain brown wrappers. And when the internet came along, they found that it was this amazing tool of communication and, frankly, propaganda. So we saw things like websites of a group called Stormfront, whose motto is white pride worldwide. And we also saw evidence, and continue to see it, that online hate is linked to those prone to act on their hate-filled aggression. We talk about this in the book. Recall the incident of the museum guard at the Holocaust Museum who was murdered by an 88-year-old white supremacist who had his own website promoting white power. Who regularly engaged in online hate chats with people who egged him on to eventually do what he did. And then there are the cloaked websites, the one that we point to because it amazingly is still up because we've been talking about it for a decade, is martinlutherking.org, which on its homepage looks like a tribute to Dr. King, but when you drill down really is nothing more than a racist website. And most of us in this room will discount it when we see that, but think about the kids who might see it as part of a research project. You know, in the words of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical South Pacific, children have to be carefully taught to hate, and there are websites like martinlutherking.org that want to do exactly that. And there's also ample additional curriculum online that for impressionable minds really can have an impact and teach them that intolerance is normal and in fact is to be encouraged. And then of course there's a broad category of online hate affecting children, which is well known, called cyberbullying, which is an issue on which the ADL has weighed in quite a lot and has been a leader in coming up with solutions for society. That is not the main focus of our book or of my talk tonight, but I have to talk about it because it's such an important byproduct of the internet, important and sad byproduct of the internet. Most of our work in the last 10 years has been focused on Web 2.0 and social media, and the challenge of dealing with that is immense. I mean, consider the statistics. In the past minute, 400 websites went up on the internet, but in the past minute, 40,000 pages went up on Facebook. In the past minute, there were 60 to 80 hours of YouTube video posted, and it's estimated that every minute there are 300,000 tweets. So the magnitude of that content makes monitoring and dealing with hate speech almost unmanageable. And when you add to that content the comments that flow underneath that content, comments that contain unbelievably racist, misogynistic, homophobic, Islamophobic, and other forms of hate, it's truly a massive, massive problem. These are the words that pollute the internet for all of us, and these are the words that well could lead to acts of hate. There was an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum a couple years ago that showed how in the pre-internet world, a barrage of surprisingly subtle propaganda was disseminated by the Nazis about Jews, and it conditioned the society for the demonization of the Jews that eventually happened and eventually allowed the Holocaust to happen. And of course, hundreds of years before that, the preaching in Spain about Jews as Christ killers led directly to the Inquisition and to their killing and to their exile. So fast forward from the hate of the Inquisition to today and to the internet, and who can say what the constant barrage of hate will lead to? So perhaps the best social commentators on that issue about the internet today and its effect are comedians. Comedian Bill Burr has claimed that exactly 13% of people online are cool. The rest of us are just a bunch of animals. John Oliver, when he was subbing for Jon Stewart earlier this summer on The Daily Show, showed a video on YouTube of a little kitten. You know, cat videos are, I guess, among the most prolific content on the internet. So this was a kitten playing with a stream of water under a faucet. And one of the comments under that video was, "Obama is an effing N-word." Bill Maher and Louis C.K. have explained that the internet, they put it very bluntly, is making us cruel and empty, in their words. And here's an example that Bill Maher recently shared on his show. So when reporting on the recent crowning of our nation's first Indian Miss America, Maher reviewed the tweets that this beauty queen has endured, such as, how the F does a foreigner win Miss America? She's an Arab. The hashtag idiots. Congratulations, Al-Qaeda, our Miss America is one of you. And in his New Rule segment of his TV show, Maher went on to say this: why has hate become the national pastime? Technology does have something to do with it. Some people say we were always terrible. We just have Twitter and Facebook now. And Maher goes on to say, no, not like this. The greatest generation had celebrities, but no one would have thought to send Myrna Loy a telegram that said, F you, Myrna Loy, I hope Clark Gable gives you herpes. When you see Facebook events like Kill a Jew Day and people using the veil of anonymity to say and do really awful things, you understand where Bill Burr and John Oliver and Bill Maher and Louis C.K. are coming from. And I'm sure you've all seen it, or perhaps sadly you've experienced it. And think about how often what one sees affects your worldview. There was an article recently in the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education that was entitled Extending Campus Life to the Internet, Social Media, Discrimination, and Perceptions of Racial Climate. And it was reported that African Americans experienced more online racial discrimination and online stress, and that affected them significantly. They had a significantly more negative view of campus racial climate because of what they observed online, even on campuses where the racial climate was good. That's all right. So everybody now has to tweet Jim. So obviously, the effects are not limited to on campus and how they affect people's perceptions on campus. Take the example of Myanmar. That nation may be seen as a late bloomer in terms of online connectivity, but it's caught on fast and furious. And like the rest of the world, the internet has become a major player in determining the political climate, and it is fueling emotions. The hatred between the Buddhists and the Muslims, which turned ugly and violent there, spread to central Myanmar since March last year, and it's wormed its way into the online space. In fact, we've seen that the hate speech circulating on Facebook has raised the eyebrow of many Buddhists and Muslims because they're attacking each other openly, including calling openly for people to commit violent acts against the others of other faith. So back here at home, let me give you some examples of what's been happening recently online on the internet. In February 2012, Lisa Curry was a sophomore at the University of Buffalo, and she was a budding journalist. She wrote a column for the Spectrum student newspaper, and in that column, she expressed her distaste for tattoos. And the article was published online, and as they do, it went viral. So in return for an incredible number of page views for her article, she suffered withering public and private attacks from strangers worldwide. They belittled every bit of her personality, her looks, her upbringing, and her morals. She experienced what is now well known as an internet drubbing. A much more famous internet drubbing, and one that was much more disturbing, it happened right here in Silicon Valley. In 2007, Cathy Sierra was one of the most visible women in tech. She taught Java programming at Sun. Her books on software design were tops at Amazon. Her blog was on the Technorati's Top 100, and her writing focused on design and coding, and frankly included very little that could be considered controversial. But what she proposed did become unbelievably controversial. She proposed that comments on her blog be moderated. And that reasonable request for online moderation prompted hundreds of commentators on her blog, believe it or not, to make rape and death threats. One of them said, "I hope someone slits your throat." People posted photoshopped images of her with a pair of panties choking her or a noose near her head. And as bad as the online attacks were, things got worse. A truly awful person named Andrew Arnheimer is a well-known hacker and a well-known anti-Semite. Haters seem to be equal opportunity, and they don't discriminate when it comes to who they hate, even though they discriminate in every other way. So Arnheimer circulated Cathy Sierra's home address and social security number online. He also made false statements about her being a battered wife and a former prostitute. So not only did she find herself a target for identity theft, but all the people who had threatened to brutally rape and kill her now knew where she lived. And Cathy Sierra in 2007 felt she had no choice but to log off of the internet, and she didn't return to the web until about 2 months ago, this year. She gave up book deals, she gave up speaking engagements, she even fled her home. And what resulted essentially was an anonymous internet group had chased her off the web and out of tech, and it actually hijacked her offline life. Before Arnheimer publicized Sierra's home address and social security number, he had become somewhat of a hero to many in the hacking and hate community. He made a name for himself through the clever methods he used to punish enemies and for generally wreaking havoc. In 2009, he claimed to hack into Amazon's system and reclassified books about homosexuality as porn. That same year, he posted several anti-Semitic rants on YouTube. In one, he blames Jews for porn and accuses them of dominating the country's banking system, which is a common trope we hear. He wrote, "The Jews are winning. I think we should hold the people producing it responsible. We take all these vile pornographers and all these effing bankers that fund pornography, we line them up the street and we crucify them just like they crucified Christ. And that would be change I could effing believe in, blood in the streets." Arnheimer is now in jail. In March, he was sentenced to spend 41 months in prison for releasing the email addresses of 114,000 AT&T customers. He said all he did was expose a security flaw, and that forced the company to secure its systems. But according to him, he was doing society a favor. The FBI saw it differently. They called it identity fraud and conspiracy to access a computer without authorization, a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Let's get back to Cathy Sierra. Despite everything, she says she's lucky, if you can believe that. She recently said in an interview that things could have been far worse. She said, "What happened to me pales into comparison to what's happening to women today." And I must tell you, sadly, Cathy Sierra is right. On the internet today, where haters and trolls dominate, they have legions of followers and fans. People don't think twice today about launching vicious personal attacks, and if the target doesn't like it, he or she is blamed for being overly sensitive. It's never the troll who's wrong. They argue they're just exercising their First Amendment right to free speech, but blaming the victim is perfectly reasonable. So take the recent case of Caroline Criado Perez, a British journalist who led a successful campaign to get the image of author Jane Austen on one of UK's banknotes. This summer, Criado Perez received thousands of threats on Twitter after making her proposal for the Austen banknotes. Here's one. "Women that talk too much need to get raped," wrote one using the handle rapey1 in a tweet directly to her. Some were so disgusting that I really can't even repeat them here. The threatening tweets were also directed, by the way, at male journalists who were critical of the attacks, engaging in counter-speech. But I'm sorry to tell you that Twitter harangues are just one example of online harassment. In July, the Washington Post published a story about men who post phony ads to make it appear as if their ex-wives or girlfriends are soliciting sex. One man, Michael Johnson of Hyattsville, Maryland, published an ad entitled "Rape Me and My Daughters" and included his ex-wife's home address. And more than 50 men showed up to the victim's house. One man tried to break in and another tried to undress her daughter. Johnson was sentenced to 85 years in prison. His victim was physically unharmed, but the ads obviously can be lethal. In December 2009, a Wyoming woman was raped in her home after an ex-boyfriend assumed her identity and posted a Craigslist ad that read, "Need an aggressive man with no concern or regard for women." Her ex and the man who raped her are both serving long prison sentences. And online harassment is not just directed at women. It can take many forms. Consider the message sent to many African Americans by Trayvoning. That's the meme that caught on after the death of Trayvon Martin, who's the teenager who was stalked and killed in Florida last year. People recreated scenes of Martin's death and posted photos on the web. And some of the pictures showed teenage boys and girls lying on the floor wearing hoodies and holding bags of Skittles. And you may remember in 2010, Tyler Clementi, an 18-year-old Rutgers student, jumped to his death from the George Washington Bridge in New York City after his roommate used a webcam to secretly record him kissing another man. And Clementi's roommate then wrote about the scene on Twitter, humiliating Clementi. Ruth Marcus, who's a columnist at the Washington Post, has written about what she calls the weaponization of hate speech. And she referred specifically to revenge porn, the practice of posting nude pictures to the web of a former lover in an attempt to embarrass, defame, or terrorize them. So the cost of online hate are not just borne by the victims of revenge porn or the posting of home addresses. In February, a long-term study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that established that bullies and their victims both have a higher rate of mental illness for decades afterwards. Science magazine recently reported on the effects of nasty comments about science stories online. They concluded that not only do they fail to improve debate, obviously, but they make people stupider. The nasty effect, as they called it, has a polarizing effect in that readers react by becoming more entrenched in their previous opinions, whether they're positive or negative. And just today, the Wall Street Journal reported on the decision of Popular Science to eliminate the comments section of its online edition precisely because of the negative effects of these offensive comments. The use of pseudonyms and anonymity greatly increases how much people write online, some say by as much as 5 times. But the depersonalization and that indirectness fuels abuse. People say things online anonymously that they would never say to your face. And the absence of accountability that's promoted by anonymity really does have genuinely negative effects, even if anonymity plays an important role in society in protecting privacy and free expression. But you know, anonymous Twitter and web comments really are just new expressions of that oldest form of monsters, which is the power of the angry crowd. And that's really what we're talking about today. The angry crowd has gone online. When the Huffington Post recently banned anonymous comments, it likened the situation to the scene that you may remember in To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus's kid Scout approached the lynch mob that was about to go into the jail, and Scout recognized one of the men by name, basically shaming him through this identification and prompting him to call his friends back, and they retreated. And as the Huffington Post explained it, people who are known in society are less likely to do antisocial things. But what the internet does is empower people to be anonymous and not known, and therefore to do antisocial things. So it's gratifying to those of us focused on internet hate for decades to now see all of this attention. The Huffington Post dealing with this issue, the Wall Street Journal writing stories, Science Magazine, and so forth. Even Esquire magazine wrote an article recently that said the internet has reached peak hate. I hope they're right. I'm not sure that they are. They said hate is a source of acknowledged pleasure. Hate watching, hate listening, hate reading. These are all things that you, your friends, and your neighbors, people who are not monsters, by the way, likely do. And it's not just online, though. The internet is the most obvious theater of cruelty. What's new is how all the bullying is on the record, so you can just see how horrific it is. Cyberbullying and its adult cousin trolling are merely the most extreme expressions of the low-level, mean-spirited abuse that fills every comment board and social media forum. They go on, the sheer bulk of rage at the moment can seem overwhelming, but the fact we recognize it and have acknowledged its unacceptability is a sign of the ancient process reasserting itself yet again. The internet, Esquire concludes, is in the process of being civilized. Well, I'm not so sure. I'm heartened by the fact that there is this attention that's being focused on it, and even a movie called Disconnect, which is a new film about the ugly perils of the web that stars Mark Jacobs. But the guiding principle of the American internet, which is freedom from oversight and an environment where ideas can be freely exchanged, has also resulted in a petri dish for this hate to continue to grow. While the web has achieved, in many ways, the idyllic vision of a marketplace of ideas, with individuals having the ability to communicate with large audiences, which used to be a power that only media tycoons and government has, it also is allowing haters to have that same audience, and people who wouldn't normally be haters to engage in conduct characteristic of the mob. The lack of gatekeepers obviously means that frictionless communication is possible, but it also means that that quality of that communication really can't be controlled. And on the internet today, that absence of consequence for what people put on the internet is allowing hate to flourish. So the internet experience is being degraded by those who are bent on settling scores, intimidating enemies, or simply silencing those people that they disagree with, or engaging in hate for fun. The social networks say that the sheer scale makes the management incredibly difficult. The police say they're overwhelmed. And for these reasons, many people just throw up their hands. So what is the solution? Do we simply throw up our hands and acknowledge hate on the internet as the necessary byproduct, the necessary pollution that we all have to endure? And I think the answer, it won't surprise you to hear, that Abe Foxman and I reach in our book, and the answer that the ADL lives by every day is no. We don't have to simply endure these affronts to human dignity and to civility. But what is the solution? One of the chapters in our book is called There Ought to Be a Law. And both Abe and I are lawyers, and we conclude that actually the law is probably the least effective tool to deal with this situation. First of all, in the United States, we have the First Amendment, and we don't want the government deciding in large part what speech is inbound or out of bounds. Speech that crosses a line that constitutes a direct threat to an individual or results in direct harm, such as the incidents that I recited, obviously is prosecutable. But speech codes are not permitted in the United States, and where they are permitted in places like Germany and Europe and Israel, you can understand why they have them. It is literally unspeakable, given the historical records in Germany, for example, to deny the Holocaust. But in terms of the effectiveness of those laws, not so much. We've likened it to cockroaches in your kitchen. You can kill one of them on the table, but there are going to be thousands more behind the wall. And that's really illustrated by the statistics that I recited earlier about how much content is put out there every minute. We also explain in the book how people who are prosecuted often become martyrs in the hate community, and their followers then syndicate all of their content as a tribute to them. So if the law is not the answer, what is the answer? We think that there's a variety of things that society can do. Obviously, counter speech is important, sunlight being the best disinfectant, but how many people here have actually responded to hate speech or reported it to an intermediary or taken steps to see that it's addressed in some fashion? Not many. And this is a group, I would venture to say, of pretty internet savvy people. Education is has a hugely important role to play, but we see in the United States that we don't have much in the way of cyber education. The digital natives are let to roam the neighborhoods of the internet without a whole lot of guidance. We wouldn't let our kids go out into a big city and into the worst neighborhoods without telling them a little bit how to protect themselves or perhaps not to wander in those neighborhoods, but we do it regularly when it comes to the internet. So we call for some sort of cyber literacy education that includes a core component on civility, on how to treat others, and frankly, how to protect yourselves, because what you say and do online can come back to haunt you in many ways for the rest of your life. Finally, we say that there's a very important role for the intermediaries working with civil society, working with people who are interested, and we see examples of it right here in the Valley with Facebook and Google and many others who've sat down with the ADL and with civil society and with free speech groups to talk about how do we address this in a holistic fashion so that complaints can be adjudicated fairly and reasonably, preserving free expression, but also addressing the human dignity issues that we talked about. So we conclude in the book that the old schoolyard adage that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you is simply not true, and that society really must do something about it. And we provide some solutions, we propose some solutions, some examples, but we hope most of all that we provoke discussion and get you thinking about this and get you talking about this with your friends and family, because we think it is such an urgent problem. And we conclude by saying, quoting Edmund Burke, that's all that's necessary for the triumph of evil is that good people do nothing. Or we could quote Elie Wiesel, who turned 85 yesterday, who said that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. And what we hope our book will provoke is not indifference to hate on the internet, but serious attention by society and by individuals. So let me stop there, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chris. That was a really amazing introduction to this topic. If you have questions, please come up to the mics, because the alternative is I'll ask questions, and it's much better if you join us instead. And thank you. It's a really hard topic to get into and to do well. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you very much.
So first question.
Sir.
Hi, I'm Jim Fenton. I'm interested in what you think should be done in the way of education for youth. As the dad of a 14-year-old daughter who is, obviously a digital native, I've been able to educate her about, some of the way that people should behave online and, all that sort of thing. But As she was coming up through elementary and middle school, I was frustrated by the fact that there was basically nothing in the curriculum about that. So I'm wondering how you would suggest that we get, how and at what level we should get that into our schools.
So, one of the things I think kids should watch when they're old enough to understand the message of the movie is the movie Defending Your Life. Do you remember that movie with Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep? And I think it was from the pre-internet era, but it's about Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep sitting in the waiting room to heaven to be adjudicated, and they're going to review the videotape of their lives. And Meryl Streep's fine with that, but Albert Brooks goes, "Wait a minute, there's a videotape of my life? I'm never going to get into heaven." And I think one of the places to start is to teach kids that what they do online has consequences that really can affect what schools they get into, what jobs they have, what social interactions they have. We used to say to new associates in my firm, remember, anything you say in public could be on the front page of the Washington Post back when people used to buy the Washington Post. And that's the basic message, is sort of self-preservation. Be careful what you do to yourself and about yourself. And then the extension of that is be careful what you do to others, because that also will be part of your permanent record and will result in people judging you for your juvenile conduct as an adult. So that's one place to start. But I think the Department of Education ought to fund core curricula that can then be replicated in school systems around the country. I think there are only a couple of school systems that even authorize the teaching of cyber literacy education. You could probably get the software industry to fund the anti-copyright infringement element of that curriculum.
So we'll just alternate back and forth.
Hey, thanks for coming out. I have two questions. One's really quick. What's the key distinction between cyberbullying and a troll? Don't know the...
I'm not sure there's a technical distinction, but I think cyberbullying is typically thought about as something that affects and is done by kids, whereas trolls are grown-up cyberbullies.
All right, and my next question is, what can average people do to protect themselves from trolls and cyberbullies?
Not to engage is a very important way, but not to be kicked off the internet. So one of the ways to deal with it is to report it. If you're on Facebook and you find yourself the victim of attacks, Facebook has a very well-established mechanism to deal with that, as do many of the other services.
Thanks.
Sure.
One of the issues is anonymity. A lot of people who threaten people, for example, might not do it if people knew who they were. How hard would it be technically so that you could trace all these tweets and all the stuff that people post anonymously?
That's probably a better question for Alicia than for me, because it's something that, as a computer scientist, she deals with more regularly, and her colleagues. But there are some who would say you're never anonymous. You may have a username, but it can always be tracked back to you. I'm not sure whether that's the case or not, but it takes some real effort, though, to unmask anonymous people online. And the fact that you can be unmasked and that trail can be followed back to you doesn't seem to deter people from using that mask of anonymity to do some really terrible things.
Okay.
So my question is about what you propose to do about the internet. I mean, unless you turn it off, there's going to be hate speech on the internet. So my question is really about facts. Even offline, things like chemical weapons in Syria, nobody agrees on what the facts were to this day. Nations are still going back and forth on that. So how do you propose to address facts? Kind of open-ended question.
So I think it's one of the reasons why we're against a code that will prohibit certain kinds of hate speech, because first of all, it's very hard to define, but secondly, a code in the wrong hands could be used as a censorship tool. And that's why we think sub-communities within the internet, the platform providers working with stakeholders, should discuss what's inbounds and out of bounds, and should be transparent about it, so that we understand how they're making their decisions.
How can I get involved? I have a really considerable personal story. I mean, my company lost $20 million as a result of what I call a cyberbully. I'm learning the new term here. I started out 10 years ago trying to find out who this person was who really spent most of her days defaming me on the internet at the cost of my company's product and to her personal gain. It was a competitor who went to all kinds of extreme lengths, and she was very violent with her speech. To make a long story short, you know, I'm a very spiritually grounded adult human being who, one day at a time, that chipping away at with internet speech became really traumatic for myself and for my teenage daughter. It's still very painful. My case started out in the state courts, and then through an appeal that I filed as a result of a SLAPP statute. It was kind of an interesting case, but at any rate, the attorneys decided that it was an antitrust case. So now we are in the federal court in Los Angeles. I'm going to win. The judge has awarded us a very favorable ruling. Thus far, we're set for trial in a year. But I'm telling you that the anonymous email threats, people that I've talked to, and I've talked to people all over, business owners as well as people that have been, you know, lost children to the internet bullying and that sort of thing. And you know, what I've noticed is that from the legal community to the psychiatric community, people are really in denial. It's sort of like if they've ever been touched by it, they get it. They get the trauma associated with this. If they haven't, if they've not experienced it, it's sort of like, oh, well, it's just a few words out there, and
So
it's just
that's why I'm somewhat heartened that there does seem to be more attention by mainstream media, by comedians, by society in general on this issue, focusing on it in a way that we really hadn't seen in the past decade. We've been working on this issue for 20 years. And it really is only now that these stories are bubbling up and people are saying this is something that really needs to be addressed. You know, I often get calls in my law practice life from CEOs who get incensed about a tweet or a posting or something. And often I give them the advice that there is the Oscar Wilde effect. If you dignify it by addressing it, particularly if you use a howitzer to go after a gnat, you know, you're just going to bring much, much more attention to it. In your situation, it sounds...
I haven't been on the internet. I'm scared to speak.
Right.
I've lost my voice. I feel like I've lost my power.
Yeah. So yours is just another, and unfortunately, a sequence of stories that, you know, deserve airing and deserve attention. I wish you luck in your lawsuit.
My question, though, to you was, how do I get involved?
Through the ADL, we'd love to have your participation, your contribution to support the staff that works on this full time. And your attention. I mean, when you see something, say something is not restricted to bags and bus stations. You can report abuse, you can report hate speech to the platforms that are hosting that hate speech. Thank you.
So before we move over, I just want to acknowledge, and I'm really sorry for whatever your experience was, right? That sounds like it was really traumatic and continues to be.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming and speaking about it tonight. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm addressing the Stormfront organization and their misappropriation of Martin Luther King's name. And I see that they're registered in the U.S., and I understand the World Wide Web is worldwide. Is there any organization that could pass a law similar to the Stolen Valor law that's protecting Medal of Honor winners from fakes, which could, or the Mickey Mouse and Marilyn Monroe copyright thing that for a famous person like Martin Luther King, that somebody couldn't appropriate the name and use it, or is it all free speech protected and they can do whatever they want?
There is a fine line between social commentary, satire, and misappropriation of someone's name. But I don't know whether the King family has ever pursued that site or not. They have.
So to repeat for the camera from the audience, the King family has pursued that, but the name was never trademarked, so they've been unsuccessful.
Sir.
So I think I want to suggest a modification to the position that you're suggesting, which what I heard was let's not have a law. You said a code. I assume you meant something like a law.
Yes.
But let's work with private industry groups that can collaborate with constituencies. That means a great many more efforts, and on the average, companies behave very differently than countries. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but definitely differently. And so the modification I'm going to suggest is the work with the companies is the research work for what should become something that I'll call a standard. It might turn into a law, but that you don't want to you don't want to codify at a legal level until you have some idea of what the effects will be, and that requires experiments. And that the work with the industry groups is really a variety of experiments. The other side of this, though, is, I'm sorry, you said transparent and you said company in the same sentence?
I did.
And you're talking about privacy and hate speech. The track record that I've been seeing doesn't bode too well for that, even with groups that clearly mean well.
Sure.
Necessity is the mother of invention. And certainly around here, probably in the past 10 years or 8 years, a company was founded called Reputation Defender, now called Reputation.com, to take on somewhat different problems of people being defamed and on the web. But what I was really coming up here to talk to you about is tomorrow night, this topic continues in a way up in San Francisco at CNET headquarters from the Internet Society, which is having a debate on internet privacy and government surveillance, moderated by Declan McCullough of CNET.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Jim?
Hey, my name is Jim. So you have defamation on this end of the spectrum. So I don't understand. Like, there's defamation. I don't get it. And then there's like defense of privacy over here with like on a legal standpoint. So could you explain the dichotomy of defamation, which I don't believe in? You can't adjudicate and do countermeasures against defamation. But let's talk about privacy. So to explain that dichotomy. Thank you. I'll take my answer off the air.
I'm not sure I can explain it in a soundbite. Let me think about it, and we'll talk after, if that's okay, because I want to get my head around the question before I give you an.
Thank you. Final question.
Hi. There's obviously a big connection between the expectation of privacy that people have, and because most of the hate speech, the cultural problem, is because people do it anonymously. How do you see the legal landscape evolving in the next year, balancing the gray area of expectation of privacy versus accountability? Or what is the current landscape now? And also, is there any standard law that address how web platform should address when someone reports some form of hate speech? Is there any minimum requirement of a department in charge of addressing this type of issues?
So most of the online platforms, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and others, have codes, terms of use or community standards that talk about speech that attacks others based on their race, religion, sexual orientation, national origin, and so forth. They're very broad standards, and they invite users to file complaints if they see speech that crosses those lines or violates those standards.
Okay.
And so what the ADL working group is doing is working with those intermediaries to understand how they respond to those complaints. How do they process them?
Okay, in terms of law enforcement, you're saying?
Not law enforcement, but enforcement by the intermediaries. And that's a work in process. But it's important because I think a lot of the self-policing is going to be the way to address this.
Okay. And the other thing is...
Could you come up to the mic, please?
Let's say if you want to take some sort of legal action or approach law enforcement, do you have to prove that you suffered a form of damage, or is the hate speech, the attack against your human dignity enough for you to take, let's say, approach law enforcement?
So in the United States, it would have to cross a line that's pretty far down the field. So simply an offense to your human dignity is not going to be enough, typically, for law enforcement. It has to be a specific threat directed at you specifically. So some of the examples I gave in my talk would constitute that kind of actionable threat, which is why those people went to jail.
Okay.
But so much of the intolerant hate speech we see today in the comment boards or in the drubbing that people...
If you say someone's ugly, this
So
is not...
the example that I give is that I went on Bill O'Reilly and gave some legal commentary, and when I got home, I had an email that said, F you and your big ears too.
Wow.
And nobody had talked about my big ears since 7th grade. And so that was an affront to my human dignity, but I don't think I could have had that person arrested because of that, as much as I might have wanted them.
So I want to thank you all for being here. This is a really important topic, and I really appreciate that you all came out tonight. Thank you for doing that, and very much, Chris, you're fantastic. Thank you for all of your work.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all very much.